Hey, Critical Viewing. This is a continuation of our notes, movies, and World War II. So what I want to start off talking to you today about is the fact that the American movie industry is at its peak during World War II. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, there was no television to compete with. So while televisions were invented, they were not being mass produced at the time, and people didn't have televisions in their homes the way that we have them today. So there was no TV to compete with at all. So the only way that you could get entertainment was to actually go to the movies. People wanted to go to the movies to relax from the stresses associated with life during the war. Living during a wartime period was tremendously stressful for people. So, going to the movies was a great way to unwind and relax. In addition to that, people went to the movies to see what was happening in the war because during the movies, they would show news footage and important news about the war that would be shown at the beginning of the movie. So, kind of similar to the way that we had previews in the movie theater, they would actually show these news reels. So, people would go to see what was actually happening overseas. Now, there are two really famous World War II directors, Alfred Hitchcock, which we will be seeing a film of his later in the course. He made several movies that supported Britain's effort during the war. And then there's also a famous German director, a female named Leni Riefenstahl. And she was a German female director who made Triumph of the Will in 1934. And essentially, what she did was she created propaganda to glorify the German people and Hitler's Nazi people. So now we kind of have to ask ourselves, so who makes propaganda? Uh, Government agencies, obviously, they make propaganda, but also private companies. Because again, it always goes back to that idea that it's to benefit the sponsor either directly or indirectly. So any place in which influencing someone to think a certain way or to behave a certain way would benefit the sponsor, likely what they are created to create those changes in attitudes and actions is propaganda. So whether it's a government agency or a private company, all propaganda during World War II was believed to be important, and that it would be unpatriotic if you didn't believe in the propaganda that was being created. During that time period, the U.S. citizens still very much believed and trusted the federal government. This attitude changes during the Vietnam War. However, during World War II, people were specifically very vulnerable to propaganda because they did believe in the government and that the government was working in their best interests. So here are some forms of propaganda. Cartoons was a big form of propaganda. Bugs Bunny, Porky Pig, Daffy Duck, they were all used to gain public support. And one of the ways that they did that was that they negatively characterized the leaders of Italy, Japan, and Germany in their cartoons. In addition, posters. That was a big way to generate some propaganda, similar to the way that we see memes and things like that floating around on social media. They would use powerful images to encourage women to help with the American cause. So Rosie Riveter was going to be one of those people who really kind of influenced Americans to join the war effort. In addition to that, there was radio programs. They would create news hours on the radio programs in which they would talk about things to try to influence people. Then you had your newspaper articles, and then presidential press conferences. Those were also forms of propaganda. Now, they're all propaganda because essentially they're trying to use their influence to persuade the American people to think a certain way. And that's really what you kind of have to go back to, is always that idea of who is the sponsor and does it benefit them directly or indirectly. Now, the United States government continues to recognize the deep power of propaganda as they have special federally programs that research the best ways to influence America. And one of the ways that they do it now is through social media. So we saw that definitely. We see that going on within our social media as a very, very good way to reach large audiences with images and videos and content to try to influence people to feel and act a certain way.